Welcome back, Commander. Work on cataloging all available information regarding the Second World War continues. If you've seen my last report, you'll know that I primarily focused on the operations of a single Allied commander, who operated under the codename of Field Commander A9. His accomplishments throughout the war were integral in helping the Allies secure victory against the Soviet Union. Nevertheless, Commander A9 was just one of many field commanders who fought on behalf of the Allied cause. In this report, I'd like to cover the operations of another field commander, whose codename remains unknown. Unlike Commander A9, this field commander didn't report directly to the supreme leader of the Allied forces, Günther von Essling, nor Deputy Commander Nikos Stavros. Instead, he reported to Brigadier General Ben Carville, one of the men responsible for leading American expeditionary forces in Europe. Now, before I dive into the bulk of this report, I will reiterate a disclaimer I made in my previous report for those who may not have seen it. Though I will do my best to catalog the operations of this particular field commander as accurately as I can, there may still be gaps of missing or lost information. In such cases, I will take some creative liberties in filling in these gaps, while still trying to keep my interpretations in line with the original source material. In the early stages of the war, the Allies were primarily on the defensive, desperately trying to hold back the red tide of Soviet forces advancing through Europe. Some of the heaviest fighting occurred in Greece, where the Soviets deployed sarin nerve gas against both military and civilian targets. The Allies needed to halt the deployment and production of this gas, and a newly appointed field commander was tasked with achieving this goal. Such a vital assignment would act as a trial by fire for the new field commander, who reported to Carville for his first briefing.
Sarin nerve gas. The Soviets love it. It's colorless, odorless, but it sure as hell ain't painless. They probably took out this whole town using a bottle half the size of my... Now, the Soviets have a convoy carrying enough sarin to gas all of Europe. I want you to find that convoy, blow the hell out of it. I want you to find their underground production facilities, blow the hell out of it. Think you can remember that? Oh, and evacuate any civvies who get in the way. Remember, we're the good guys. Oh, by the way, I'm General Carville. Welcome to Greece.
After his initial introduction and briefing with Carville, the field commander received further details regarding his assignment. Gathered intelligence reported that a Soviet convoy of sarin nerve gas had stopped at a riverside outpost for refueling. This would be the perfect opportunity to destroy the shipment, and remove the Soviet threat in the area. The field commander was to lead his forces in destroying the convoy trucks and the base. Most importantly, none of the convoy trucks could be allowed to escape the region. Allied intel stated that the Soviets kept their convoy information in a radar center nearby the base, and suggested that if a spy were to infiltrate this facility, it might help the commander in locating the convoy's escape routes. The Allied commander's forces arrived in the region just in time to catch two of the convoy trucks attempting to leave. One of the trucks, along with a couple of escorts, were taken out by mines placed by Allied reconnaissance forces. The other convoy truck retreated back to base, informing its comrades of the Allied presence in the region. As the Allied commander began establishing his base, he sent the two assigned spies under his command to scout out the area. One of them went south, discovering a large ore field and some gems, guarded by a couple of Soviet soldiers and a single mammoth tank. The other spy went north across a river, finding another field of gems beside a road that led west out of the region. This spy continued east, crossing another river into a civilian village, whose denizens appeared to be loyal to the Soviet cause. Meanwhile, the spy in the south moved east, discovering a road that also led out of the region. Following the road northward, the spy found a short bridge spanning the river, guarded by a couple of Soviet troops. After crossing a bridge at the east end of the civilian village, the northern spy caught sight of the enemy radar center. After radioing back to base of the Discovery, he made his move to infiltrate the building. Unfortunately, the spy failed to notice the attack dogs guarding the facility, which killed him before he could make it inside. After this incident, the spy in the south was ordered to return to base, for he was now the only one capable of infiltrating the radar center, once the attack dogs had been eliminated, that is. While the commander's ore truck was gathering the gems in the north, the driver noticed one of the civilians from the village make his way across the river and place down a smoke signal. A short time later, a Soviet plane flew over the signal, paradropping flamethrower troops who made their way south to attack the Allied base. These troops were easily dealt with by the base's defenses. However, this incident proved without a shadow of a doubt that the civilians were working directly with the Soviets. The last spy was loaded onto an APC which rushed east through the civilian village and across the bridge toward the enemy radar center. After eliminating the attack dogs, the spy jumped out of the vehicle, making his way into the facility. Inside, he uncovered the primary routes the convoy trucks would take to escape the region. The northern route led across the bridge, going through the village to cross a ford and another river to the west. The convoy truck would then make its way along the road and exfiltrate the region beside the northern gem field. The next route would see the convoy trucks moving west along the road in the middle of the region. For the Allied commander, this would be the ideal route for them to take, as his base awaited them at the end. For the last route, the convoy trucks would cross the bridge in the southeast, and follow the long road southward out of the region. With this information in mind, the Allied commander initiated a plan to force the convoy trucks to take the middle route. This plan hinged on sending armored companies to destroy the bridges in the north and south of the region. Whilst the commander gathered his forces, he ordered mine layers to place mines along the routes to destroy or slow any trucks attempting to escape. Once he had an armored company assembled, the commander sent it out to destroy the southern bridge, which they succeeded in doing while under fire from an enemy V2 launcher across the river. Following this accomplishment, the armored company was then sent to destroy the second bridge in the north. This would require the company to move into the civilian village, and so to discourage further acts of aiding the enemy, the Allied units eliminated any Soviet sympathizers they encountered. The northern bridge was then easily brought down by destroying oil barrels nearby. The destruction of these bridges forced the convoy trucks to take alternate routes close to the Allied base. This made it easier for the commander to completely block off these routes with his units, compelling them to take the middle route in a vain attempt at driving through the Allied base. Such actions prompted the Soviet garrison to send out forces to assault the commander's base, but he was able to repel them every time. With all escape routes secured, the commander formed a large armored company to attack an outpost just south of the primary Soviet base, where a couple of sarin gas processing facilities were located. The company smashed through the outpost's defenses, the light tanks focusing fire on the processing facilities and convoy trucks, whilst the APCs used their machine guns to take down enemy infantry. Though the company took heavy casualties, they succeeded in destroying the production buildings. In addition, the destroyed convoy trucks here were the last in the region, so the commander no longer had to worry about any more attempting to escape. This freed up more units for the commander to utilize during his final assault on the primary base. The Soviet base would be difficult to crack, as it was surrounded by concrete walls. Furthermore, it had 3 Tesla coils guarding its main entrances in the south and west. The power plants were located on the southeast side of the base. The Allied commander noticed that a hole could be blown in the concrete walls protecting the plants, and a few tanks could be funneled through this opening to destroy them, bringing the Tesla coils offline. This is exactly what the commander did, using one armored company to break down the walls and destroy the only defending V2 launcher. As soon as the tanks started firing upon the power plants, the rest of the Soviet defenders rushed over to engage them. However, they were unable to stop the Allied units from destroying enough of the power plants, bringing the Tesla coils offline. With the main defenses disabled, a second armored company moved into the base from the western entrance. The two companies met in the center of the base, destroying the construction yard before bringing down the last sarin processing facility. The remaining enemy structures were destroyed, and with the last of the Soviet units eliminated, victory had been achieved. Thanks to intel collected by the spy that infiltrated the radar center, analysts at Allied High Command were able to trace the convoy's route to an underground facility. They suspected that this was a hidden access to the Soviets' main sarin plant. The commander's mission was to guide his troops through the tunnels and remove any opposition in their way. The infiltration team would need to be careful, for it was suspected that the Soviets were conducting all kinds of research within this facility. The commander was advised to use spies to scout and infiltrate factories where they could steal vehicles from. Only when the team made it to the far exit of the facility would the mission be considered complete. The Allied infiltration team entered the underground facility from a western entrance. They would have to be guided all the way to the exit at the east end of the facility. After eliminating 3 Soviet soldiers, the Allied team found themselves blocked by a single flame tower. Using a nearby computer terminal, one of the soldiers managed to disable the turret, allowing the team to move forward. They soon reached a crossroads, taking out 3 more enemy soldiers, though their path eastward was blocked by 2 more flame towers. The spy decided to head up a northern hallway, entering a room with various machinery, along with a few guards and a scientist. Spotting a computer terminal, the spy headed over and accessed it, using the terminal to destroy one of the flame turrets. After returning to the crossroads, the spy made his way down a southern hallway, entering a room full of crates, guarded by 3 enemy soldiers. The spy tried to move down a narrow corridor to the west of the room, but found himself blocked by a stack of crates. On the other side of this stack, the spy saw a row of computer terminals. If he could reach them, he might be able to use one of the terminals to disable the second flame tower. Just further south, the spy saw a war factory with a supply truck parked beside it. If he could get inside the factory and acquire the keys to the truck, he'd be able to drive around and reach the terminal to the east. The spy was ordered to execute this plan, which he succeeded in accomplishing. After exiting the truck, a patrol of Soviet guards made their way toward the spy's position, accompanied by an attack dog, which could see through his disguise. The spy hid around a corridor at the east end of the warehouse. The attack dog could sense that something was off, but ultimately ended up leaving the room. With the dog gone, the spy accessed the nearby terminal, using it to destroy the second flame tower at the crossroads. Before continuing east, the commander had his team move south to clear out the storage room in order to acquire one of the crates there. Inside this crate were medical supplies that the troops used to patch up their wounds. The Allied team then made their way eastward down the central hallway. Along the way, they killed a couple attack dogs. Seeing a few Soviet troops headed toward them, the Allies ignited some nearby explosive barrels, killing the oncoming enemies. Reaching the end of the hallway, the team encountered a wall, which they quickly realized was hiding several grenadiers on the opposite side. Unsure if the team could survive moving around this deadly gauntlet, the commander had them stand by while the spy searched for a solution. The spy found it using a terminal in an alcove to his west. Using the terminal, the spy was able to deploy canisters of sarin gas behind the wall, which killed all the enemy grenadiers. With this threat handled, the team began to move north, though were ordered to hang back while the spy scouted ahead. The spy came upon an intriguing sight: 2 Tesla coils bouncing electrical charges back and forth with each other. Their discharges were so powerful that the coils themselves were taking damage, and one would eventually be destroyed. A mammoth tank entered the room from the east, and focused fire on the tan-colored coil. Seeing a computer terminal along the wall to the west, the spy accessed it, disabling the teal-colored Tesla coil. This caused the tan coil to focus its electrical discharge on the enemy mammoth, both destroying each other at the same time. With these obstacles removed, the Allied team could move safely through the room. They continued east down a hallway, eliminating any enemies in their way. Heading south at the end of the hallway, the team discovered a large hangar with a single mammoth tank parked in the middle. Something felt off about this hangar, and the team was ordered to stand by while the spy searched the room. He found a terminal in an alcove along the western wall, and used it to activate a couple of Tesla coils that destroyed the mammoth tank. While the team received medical attention at the center of the hangar, the spy attempted to scout southward, but was killed by an attack dog. Without their spy, the team would have a difficult time continuing through the facility. Instead of heading in the initial direction the spy was going, the team made their way down a short hallway to the southwest. Upon seeing the approaching allies, a Soviet officer distracted them by shooting some nearby explosive barrels, before running south. One of the Allied soldiers noted that the officer was making stops at each prison cell. One by one, the officer executed the prisoners inside. After taking out a few guards, the Allied troops made haste to stop the Soviet officer. They managed to kill him, along with a few attack dogs. However, 4 of the 7 prisoners, including a medic, had already been executed. Fortunately, they intervened in time to save a captured spy, who now joined up with the team to see the mission through. After collecting another crate of medical supplies, the team backtracked to the hangar. Following the elimination of a few more enemy soldiers while moving southward, the team thought they heard a familiar voice at the far end of the hallway.
Shakin' baby!
The new spy made his way south down the hallway, and found Special Agent Tanya imprisoned and under guard by a couple of flame towers. Using a nearby terminal, the spy was able to disable the flame towers. Now freed, Tanya gunned down the remaining Soviet guards, and along with the spy, linked up with the rest of the team. The team continued eastward, eliminating a few more enemies as they reached a split in the hallway. Going south, the spy spotted a Soviet officer, along with several troops. 5 of these troops were part of a firing squad who were prepared to execute a technician. Just to the spy's east were the rest of the Soviet troops, along with a convoy truck. The Allied team moved in, with Tanya handling the firing squad, while the rest of the troops engaged the other enemy soldiers. They successfully rescued the technician, who hopped inside the convoy truck, trying to escape the facility on his own. The stolen truck ran into a squad of Soviet guards, who disabled the vehicle and killed the technician. But what if these soldiers had been eliminated before the technician was rescued? If such was the case, then the technician would still have met an untimely end, crashing his truck into a wall of flame towers. On the plus side, the destruction of these flame towers would have allowed the Allied team to reach the eastern exit of the facility, completing the mission. As it was, the Allied commander ordered his team to backtrack to the hangar and head north. Passing through a large storage room, the rescued spy was almost killed by an attack dog, but Tanya was on hand to prevent that. With the threat cleared, the spy took point again, discovering a war factory in a northern room guarded by a couple of flame towers. An uncrewed mammoth tank was parked beside the factory, and the spy figured he could get inside it after acquiring instructions to operate the tank inside the factory. He succeeded, driving the tank out of the room and south toward the hallway that led to the eastern exit. As the captured mammoth rounded the corner, the Soviet soldiers ordered it to stop. Instead, the mammoth fired upon the soldiers and drove full speed ahead, plowing through the rest. The mammoth then crashed into the flame towers, destroying them, along with the tank, and igniting a bunch of nearby explosive barrels. The spy's sacrifice cleared the way for the rest of the Allied team to reach the exit, resulting in the mission being accomplished. At least, that's what one after-action report says happened. Another one claims that the Allied team neither rescued the technician or captured the mammoth tank. Instead, they engaged the Soviets at the eastern exit head-on, taking casualties in the process. Tanya attempted to use the nearby explosive barrels to destroy the flame towers. This didn't work, though it did cause the spy to notice a computer terminal along the northeastern wall. Accessing this terminal allowed the spy to disable the 3 flame towers, letting the team exit the facility and complete the mission. There are even more contradictory reports regarding this mission, such as some saying that Tanya was never there at the facility, or that the prisoners were never rescued. Regardless, with the mission accomplished, the Allies now had access to the Soviets' main sarin plant, which would soon be dealt with. After reaching the end of the underground complex, the squad exited back to the surface, having successfully infiltrated the Soviet sarin facility. New Allied units were brought in to replace the original infiltration team. Upon discovering the scale of the sarin production plant, they radioed in for reinforcements. However, the main entrance was guarded by a wall of Tesla coils, so the Allies wouldn't be able to move a large force in until these were taken down. Intelligence revealed a power grid located on the east side of the region. Destroying the power plants here would disable the Tesla coils, allowing reinforcements to arrive. From there, the Soviet compound was to be destroyed, with the exception of the sarin processor buildings. These needed to be captured intact to prevent a chemical spill from contaminating the whole region. The Allied infiltration team found themselves at the west end of the region. Their spies started out eastward, coming across a mammoth tank moving toward the team along a dirt road. Thankfully, the tank veered northward, and so the spy continued east. He soon discovered an entrance into the main sarin production facility. He couldn't move into the compound, as an attack dog guarded the entrance, but from his current vantage outside, he could tell it was heavily defended. The spy continued east along the dirt road, discovering the location of the power grid, with 4 Tesla coils situated on a nearby hill overlooking a road on the other side. This was where the Allied reinforcements would arrive from. The entrance to this base was also guarded by an attack dog, so the spy couldn't get inside. He decided to backtrack west towards his team, moving through a large ore field. He once again saw the mammoth tank, this time moving east toward the power grid as part of its standard patrol route. The spy also observed a couple of oil pumps nearby, and a plan formulated in his head. After detailing his plan to the rest of the team, the rocket infantrymen were loaded onto the APC and sent north into the ore field, with the riflemen following not too far behind. The spy positioned himself near the dirt road to keep tabs on the patrolling mammoth. The rest of the team then made their way over to the oil pumps, igniting the nearby barrels. As the spy had hoped, the explosion caught the attention of the Soviet guards at the entrance of the power grid. When the guards arrived on scene to investigate, they were ambushed by the awaiting Allies, who took all of them out. The team didn't have much time to figure out how best to deal with the defensive flame towers, for the mammoth tank was on its way back in their direction. Wasting no more time on the matter, the APC sped into the power grid, swiftly passing by the flame towers and the remaining Soviet troops. Shooting some nearby oil barrels caused a chain explosion that destroyed 2 of the advanced power plants, bringing the Tesla coils offline. Noticing the Tesla coils had been disabled, the Allied reinforcements entered the region from the east. The rocket soldiers exited the APC and focused their fire on the remaining plants in order to do as much damage as they could before the mammoth tank's inevitable arrival. After eliminating the Allied riflemen just outside the power grid, the mammoth moved in to finish off the rest of the infiltration team, who were able to destroy 2 more power plants before being wiped out. While all this was happening, the Allied reinforcements of 2 light tanks and a single MCV were deciding on the best spot to establish a base. Green smoke was sighted in the middle of a patch of open ground to the south, and so the MCV headed toward it whilst the light tanks eliminated a few Soviet guards along the road. Once making it to the site of the green smoke, the Allied commander ordered his MCV to deploy and then began to quickly establish his base. It wasn't long before a Soviet patrol discovered the commander's base, and he knew retaliatory attacks would soon be sent against him. Such attacks came by land and air, so the Allied commander prioritized defense to maintain his foothold in the region. Once the commander had gotten stabilized, he sent a few light tanks out to scout the rest of the region. The tanks discovered a large ore field just to the south of the sarin facility. Further west, they found the Soviet airfield responsible for the air raids against the Allied base. The light tanks were able to destroy the airfield, permanently removing this threat from the battlefield. At the western end of the region, the light tanks discovered a hill overlooking the sarin facility, guarded by a single mammoth tank, which they destroyed thanks to their superior numbers. This hill would be a great vantage from which Allied artillery could fire down into the facility. The Allied commander formed an armored company of medium tanks and sent them into the ore field south of the sarin facility. As a couple of mobile artillery vehicles moved up onto the western hill, the armored company attacked an enemy ore truck. This prompted the Soviet garrison to move out and engage the Allied units, resulting in a large battle within the ore field. After emerging from this skirmish victorious, the Allied armored company made their assault against the enemy facility from the south. As they fought to push through the Soviet defenses, the Allied artillery vehicles lobbed shells onto enemy power plants from the hill, bringing a couple of them crumbling down. This wasn't enough to bring the Tesla coils offline though, forcing the armored company to prioritize their destruction. Once the towers were down, the remaining Allied units focused fire on the construction yard, successfully destroying it. The survivors retreated back to base, with Soviet forces in pursuit. The pursuing Soviets ended up repulsed by the defenders back at the Allied base. While the commander put together a new attack force, the lone surviving spy from the initial infiltration team moved into the sarin facility and infiltrated one of its buildings, hoping any intel he could gather would aid the Allied commander. When he was ready, the Allied commander ordered a second assault against the Soviet facility, this time attacking from the eastern entrance. The remaining Tesla coil was removed, along with the war factory. However, the entire Allied armor company was wiped out in the process. On the plus side, so few enemy defenders remained that a third and final assault would be enough to finish the job. When he had the forces, the Allied commander committed such an assault, removing the last of the Soviets' unit production buildings. These were a kennel, helipad, and the barracks. Once these buildings were out of the way, the attack force focused on destroying the rest of the base's infrastructure, including power plants, the command center, ore silos, and refineries, as well as wiping out any remaining enemy units. Though they had been damaged during the siege, the sarin processing buildings remained standing, and engineers were brought in to capture all 5 of them. While this was going on, the Allied forces headed northeast to finish off the Soviet power grid, demolishing all its buildings, plus the mammoth tank responsible for killing the initial Allied infiltration team. With all the Soviet forces here destroyed, and the last sarin processing building captured, the commander's mission was considered complete. Though the Allied commander had accomplished a vital objective in neutralizing the sarin gas threat, it did little to stop the Soviets' continued advancement through Greece. With the fighting fast approaching Athens, General Stavros insisted that he be allowed to survey the damage of his own hometown. The Allied commander's role for this mission was to help escort Stavros through the town and to a nearby friendly outpost. Once reached, Stavros would be evacuated to safety. On the off chance that this initial plan failed, the commander was to get Stavros to safety in any way possible. The Allied commander wasn't alone in aiding Stavros for this mission. Special Agent Tanya was also on the scene, acting as the general's personal bodyguard. After paratrooping into the region, Stavros and Tanya laid eyes upon the village, which was being destroyed by Soviet troops. Some of these troops saw the two allies and headed toward them. Tanya eliminated these soldiers by igniting some oil barrels nearby. Tanya and Stavros then made their way into the village and killed off the rest of the Soviet troops. However, enemy reinforcements arrived via a road from the northeast, with a few paratroopers dropping down in the south. Despite being surrounded, Tanya proved why she was the best choice to be Stavros' bodyguard, eliminating all the Soviet reinforcements. Though alive, Stavros was wounded in the engagement. The duo were then guided northward by the Allied commander, and came across a Soviet mammoth tank supported by grenadiers, who were in the process of destroying more of the village. The duo saw one civilian run out of his house heading westward. Stavros and Tanya followed him, finding a hidden path which took them around the other side of a hill, out of sight of the mammoth tank and grenadiers. Continuing north, the Allied duo passed by a couple more houses, whose civilians were in the process of leaving, moving north toward an Allied base for evacuation. Stavros could also be evacuated here as well, especially considering just how substantial the Soviet presence in this region was. As Tanya, Stavros, and the civilians reached the base, it came under attack by Soviet aircraft, which destroyed the civilian transport helicopters. While Stavros' chopper survived, he couldn't reach it due to the bridge across the river being destroyed. Soviet ground forces then launched an assault against the Allied base. After acquiring some medical supplies in a crate, the commander guided both Tanya and Stavros to the southwest. He did so just in time, as the Soviets dropped not one, but 2 atomic bombs on top of the Allied base. This was a shock to the Allies, for while they had suspected the Soviets had been developing atomic capabilities, they hadn't realized the Soviets had functional weapons in their arsenal. Fighting their way westward, Stavros and Tanya reached a beach where an Allied naval transport arrived to drop off a platoon of medium tanks. While offloading the tanks, the transport was destroyed by enemy submarines patrolling the waterways. Miraculously, some of the pursuing Soviet forces missed the Allied units, continuing southward. Another Mammoth tank didn't, but as it drew closer, nearby oil barrels were ignited, damaging the tank enough to be finished off. The medium tanks then engaged more pursuing Soviet forces, the commander ordering them to focus fire on the enemy vehicles as they were the primary threat to Tanya and Stavros. Once the pursuing vehicles had been eliminated, the Allied group headed south. The surviving medium tanks engaged another Mammoth, destroying it. Just to the southeast was a civilian hamlet, where Soviet paratroopers had just landed. This turned out to be a deadly drop-off point, as a 3rd atomic bomb was dropped right on top of them, causing a friendly fire incident that killed all of the paratroopers. Continuing on, Tanya eliminated a few Soviet troops hiding in a nearby grove. She then found a crate of medical supplies beside the husk of a ranger vehicle. Just to the east was a wide ford in the river, and defending the other side was a Tesla coil. Allied paratroopers were dropped in on top of the Tesla coil, their goal being to destroy the oil barrels nearby, whose explosions would demolish the plant powering the coil. The Allied paratroopers succeeded at the cost of their lives, with the Soviets dismantling the Tesla coil, though their troops would be taken out by Tanya. After crossing the ford, the Allied group eliminated a few more enemy troops just to their west. More troops guarding a couple of oil pumps and a bridge to the north were also removed. As she was scouting out the bridge, Tanya saw 2 Mammoth tanks moving across it toward her. Thinking quickly, Tanya shot some nearby oil barrels, whose explosions destroyed the bridge, sending the Mammoth tanks to a watery grave. The Allies would have to find another way to get across to the other side, and discovered a long ford along the western edge of the region. An enemy convoy truck was spotted headed toward them, and Tanya heavily damaged it by destroying some nearby oil barrels. The truck was then finished off, and some medical supplies were salvaged from the wreckage. Making it to the other side, the Allied group found themselves just outside the western entrance to a forward Soviet base. There was no way they could get through the defenders on their own. Thankfully, more reinforcements arrived by naval transport, landing on a beach just to the northeast of the Soviet base. This armored platoon initially tried to move in against the base, but fell back after running into the Tesla coil which guarded its eastern entrance. The Allied commander realized that a 2-pronged attack would have to be conducted with the available forces. First, more nearby oil barrels were ignited, causing a chain explosion that destroyed one of the base's power plants, shutting down the Tesla coil. The armored reinforcements then launched another attack at the base's east entrance, focusing on destroying the lone Soviet heavy tank. With it destroyed, the surviving Allied tanks moved into the base to help destroy the flame towers guarding the western entrance. Tanya aided in finishing off the Soviet troops, and once both flame towers were destroyed, she used her C4 charges to demolish the remaining base buildings. With all obstacles removed, the surviving Allies headed north, with Tanya and Stavros boarding a transport helicopter that flew both out of the region.
Stavros, you old dog. Have you got any idea what a pain in the ass you are? Well, that's not what I hear. The commander here tells me that he had to assign 3 privates to clean your diapers. General Stavros wishes to offer you his deepest appreciation and congratulations on your brilliant career.
Though Carville was happy that Stavros had been successfully evacuated, the Greek general himself was not in the same celebratory mood. Not only were the Soviets willing to use sarin gas against the civilian population, they were even dropping atomic bombs upon them as well, a capability the Allies were unaware of until now. There was no doubt now that Greece's fall to the Red Menace was inevitable, a reality that caused Stavros to slip into a depressed state of mind. The only thing the Allies could do now was to evacuate as many civilians from the country as they could. The priority were those civilians located in rural Athens, since Soviet forces were actively making their way into the region. Using his forces, the Allied commander's job was to evacuate at least 1 civilian from each of the 4 towns to an island in the northeast of the region. The commander was informed that the civilians were hiding out in churches, and they would only come out when they saw Allied forces enter their towns. While the commander would certainly encounter Soviet forces in the region, his primary objective was to rescue the civilians, so removing any Soviet threats was optional. As soon as the Allied commander's forces arrived on the scene, they were immediately discovered by Soviet scouts. Knowing that attacks would soon be sent against him, the Allied commander hastily went to work establishing his base. While in the middle of this process, he was attacked by a heavy tank, supported by enemy riflemen, that was able to defend himself with the few units he had available. Just to the east of where the commander set up his base was the island where the civilians needed to be evacuated to. Despite continued assaults by Soviet forces against his base, the Allied commander was able to maintain his foothold, and now focused on putting together an armored company to rescue the civilians from each town. The Soviets in the region must have realized this was the Allied commander's primary goal, and sent forces to attack one of the villages, which was located in the west. This prompted the commander to immediately send what forces he had to stop them before all the civilians were killed. The commander's forces arrived in the town just in the nick of time, eliminating the Soviet attackers. After the civilians from the western town were escorted back to base, the reinforced Allied armored company was sent east, finding another civilian town. The 3 civilians here deployed green smoke and exited the church upon seeing Allied forces. Following the rescue of civilians at the eastern town, the armored company discovered another town in the middle of the region, surrounded by a few hills and groves. The civilians here were sent northward, hunkering down at the commander's base with the other rescuees. The last town was found in the southwestern corner of the region. As with the previous towns, 3 civilians exited the church upon sighting Allied forces. As these last civilians were being escorted back to base, the rescue team came under attack by Soviet forces, engaging and ultimately destroying them whilst the civilians continued northward. With all the civilians safely back at the commander's base, all that was left to do now was to get them to the eastern island. Such a task seemed pretty straightforward. Construct a naval yard in the waters east of the base, and then assemble enough naval transports to ferry the civilians to the island. There were a couple of problems, however. The first was that the closest beach for the transports to make landfall was far to the south of the Allied base, putting it almost right next to the Soviet one. The second was that the waters were infested with Soviet submarines, preying on any Allied vessels they encountered. To clear the waters of enemy submarines, the Allied commander deployed gunboats. Though a few boats were lost, they managed to sink all the submarines in the waters on the eastern half of the region. The boats initially tried to secure the waters in the south, but a testicle from the Soviet base prevented them from doing so. The gunboats were then ordered to keep guard of the nearby beach the transport vessels would make landfall at. Once all of his forces were in position, the commander executed the final phase of the evacuation. It began with his armored company moving in close to the Soviet base, forcing its defenses to focus fire on the vehicles rather than the civilians running toward the beach. As the civilians were loaded onto the transports, Soviet forces poured out of their base to engage Allied units. The majority of these enemy forces were infantrymen, which the medium tanks easily crushed beneath their treads. Once all the civilians had been loaded onto the transports, the armored company was ordered to fall back to base. Reaching the island, the naval transports offloaded the civilians, who were then loaded onto transport helicopters to fly them out of the war zone. With this mission accomplished, the commander was ordered to report back to General Carville.
Funeral rules, Lieutenant. Only the good news.
All civilians have been evacuated. Repeat. Sarin gas threat has been neutralized, General.
All right. Not too shabby. Give the man some stripes.
Yes, sir. Field promotion to sergeant effective immediately.
The commies are at it again, developing atomic capabilities. General Stavros has a Siberian informant who knows where the Soviet atomic processing facilities are hidden. Stavros insists on going to meet him, personally. Stubborn old mule thinks he's a damn field agent. Yeah. Damn. The Soviets must have gotten wind of the Stavros meeting. Intel received word of a large Soviet force moving to intercept. I told Stavros he'd get himself killed playing these spy games. Help him out any way you can. Once the old mule's back, use the information he's got and find and destroy the Red's atomic operations. Nukes, bases, convoys, everything. Kick those commies out of Siberia. For me.
Experiencing firsthand how far along the Soviets had come regarding research and development of atomic weapons, it was imperative that the Allies do everything they could to stop, or at the very least delay, the development of more. The Soviets believed their research sites to be safe in Siberia, far away from the front lines. However, a small Allied strike force managed to make its way into Siberia, with the primary goal of disrupting Soviet military activity here. Part of this strike force was led by the unnamed Allied commander, whose successes in Greece earned him the opportunity to handle these vital missions. For his first mission, the Allied commander was tasked with stopping a shipment of atomic material from moving through an undisclosed region of Siberia. The materials were being transported via several convoy trucks, all of which needed to be destroyed. The commander was advised to be careful of the convoy truck cargo, as the atomic material they were carrying was reported to be highly unstable. When the commander arrived on the scene, he took control of the small Allied force that had already set up an outpost in the southwest corner of the region. The outpost had no construction yard, so the commander wouldn't be able to construct new buildings here. In addition, he was limited to the number of units he had available to him, such as only being able to assemble light tanks from the war factory. Though light tanks would be the most useful due to their speed, along with having enough firepower to destroy the lightly armored convoy trucks. The commander had 20 minutes until the first convoy arrived, and so immediately sent a couple of rangers out to do reconnaissance of the region, particularly the primary roads the convoy trucks would be using. The rangers discovered 3 bridges in the region. One was located directly east of the Allied base, all the way at the other end of the region. The second was in the northeast of the region. The third bridge was directly north of the Allied outpost, and was already in a dilapidated state. The commander surmised that if these bridges were destroyed, it would take the convoy trucks longer to pass through the area, giving his forces enough time to eliminate them. The northern bridge was destroyed by one of the rangers, using its machine gun to ignite a few nearby oil barrels. Making use of the single longbow attack helicopter at his disposal, the commander ordered it to focus on destroying the other 2 bridges in the same fashion. With the bridges gone, the commander then ordered a platoon of light tanks to move out and eliminate any Soviet patrols along the roads. This included the destruction of a couple heavy tanks and a single mammoth tank. The tank platoon was then ordered to wait atop a small hill in the center of the region. The Soviets were acutely aware of the small Allied base in the southwest, and would make attacks against it, which forced the commander to maintain a defensive garrison of infantry and vehicles there at all times. As luck would have it, the first convoy entered the region right beside the Allied base, enabling the commander's garrison to take out all 3 trucks themselves, along with their escorts. The atomic material the trucks were carrying lay among the wreckage inside teal-colored containers, and the commander did his best to keep his units away from them. The second convoy entered the region just to the north of the Allied base, and the commander utilized a second tank platoon to eliminate the trucks. Further north of the second convoy's arrival point was where the third convoy entered the region. When the convoy made it to the center of the region, the first tank platoon rolled down the hill and engaged the enemy escorts. The second tank platoon then came in from the south, destroying the convoy trucks. After the third convoy had been eliminated, the Soviets sent reinforcements into the region to eliminate the Allied forces, launching a heavy assault against the commander's base. He was able to hold the line against this assault thanks to his second tank platoon being back at base, undergoing repairs from their last engagement. The fourth convoy entered the region from one of the entrances in the west, north of the Allied base. Once again, the first Allied tank platoon engaged the convoy near the middle of the region, successfully taking out all the trucks. However, as the surviving tanks were ordered back to base for repairs, one of them ran over a container of atomic material, causing a massive explosion which wiped out the entire platoon. This incident showed the commander and the rest of his forces the importance of avoiding this atomic material at all costs. The second Allied tank platoon's repairs were completed just in time for the fifth convoy's arrival. After eliminating the convoy's Mammoth and Tesla tank escorts, the Allied units easily destroyed the 3 trucks. The sixth convoy arrived from an unexpected direction, entering the region through an entrance on the southwest side of the Allied base. The commander scrambled to reposition his defenders, who managed to destroy the convoy trucks and their Mammoth tank escorts. However, much damage was done to the Allied base, including the loss of the helipad. The seventh and final convoy entered the region from the north, escorted by 3 Mammoth tanks and a Tesla tank. The second tank platoon was sent against the convoy, destroying one of the trucks. However, in the chaos of the fighting, one of the crates of atomic material detonated, damaging several vehicles while destroying others. As luck would have it, the explosion also destroyed the last 2 convoy trucks, and with all of them eliminated, the commander's mission here was completed. According to Allied intelligence, the convoys of the last mission had been traced back to a Soviet atomic processing station. The Allies needed this facility destroyed, and all of the nuclear cargo safely neutralized. The commander's mission was seemingly simple: establish a base in the area, and destroy the processing center. However, he was not to allow any convoy trucks to leave the area, as the Allies couldn't have their operations into Moscow threatened by nuclear attack. This final point is an interesting one, as it lends evidence of these missions taking place near the end of the war, rather than in the early years, or midway through the conflict. I'll try and elaborate more on this conundrum later in this report, after I've covered these last 2 missions. The Allied commander's forces were spotted by a single convoy truck attempting to exfiltrate the region. On its flight back to base, the truck warned its comrades of the approaching Allies, which moved forward to engage them. The Allied units beat back these enemies, stopping them from destroying the MCV. Another attack was made by sea, with a naval transport dropping off Soviet troops on a beach to the south. After dealing with these troops, the commander now felt it safe to deploy his MCV and begin constructing his base. He only managed to get a few structures built before the Soviets launched another attack against him. Enemy troops attempted to cross a bridge just to the east of his base, but were cut down by a pillbox. However, Soviet paratroopers dropped in at the back side of the commander's base, where no defenses had been set up. They managed to destroy an advanced power plant before being eliminated, setting back the commander's construction efforts. A short time after this attack, the Allied commander was warned that an enemy convoy truck was attempting an escape from the region. Fortunately, this truck's escape route led right through the commander's base. Blocking the truck's route, his defense structures were able to destroy it. Consequently, atomic material was spotted among the wreckage, and the commander had to make sure his own units didn't get too close to it, lest they risk triggering an atomic explosion. After repelling additional assaults against his base from the northeast, the commander considered destroying the 2 bridges nearby, making it more difficult for any units, Allied or Soviet, to cross the river. The Soviets would unexpectedly make this decision for the Allied commander, using bombers to drop parabombs directly on top of the bridges. One was destroyed, while the other remained standing, albeit in a damaged state. Once he managed to assemble an armored company of medium tanks, the commander sent them eastward to scout out the region, destroying any enemy units they encountered. The company discovered a gem deposit, surrounded by plenty of ore fields. Making their way to the northeast corner of the region, the company discovered a small Soviet airbase. Before he could order them to attack the airbase, the commander received word of another convoy truck attempting an escape, and so ordered his company to pull back and stop this truck. As the tanks were falling back, a couple more Soviet bombers flew overhead, destroying another nearby bridge. The armored company returned near the Allied base just in time to destroy the second convoy truck, along with its escorts. From here, the commander decided to focus on reacting to the escaping convoy trucks, rather than discovering the location of the enemy base. For even if he found it, he wouldn't be able to destroy it on account of it being heavily guarded. A short time later, the commander was notified that the third convoy truck was attempting an escape. In a bid to distract the commander, the Soviets launched an attack against his base from the southeast. The commander's defenses held up against it, while his armored company stopped the truck at a small ford in the river directly east of his base. Finally, having had enough of the constant air raids directed against him, the commander sent his armored company to the northeast to destroy the Soviet airfield. After succeeding, the company spotted a 4th convoy truck attempting to escape. With the destruction of this truck, the Allied commander was notified that there were no more convoy trucks in the region. His armored company engaged Soviet forces coming to defend their ore truck, which the Allied tanks had fired upon. A Tesla tank managed to trigger the atomic material left behind from the 4th convoy truck, causing an explosion that destroyed 3 of the Allied tanks, and severely damaging 2 more. One of the tank crews picked up a nearby crate, which miraculously had spare parts the surviving Allied units used to repair their vehicles. This enabled them to make a hasty retreat back to base, surviving to fight another day. With all the convoy trucks destroyed, the Allied commander could now begin to go on the offensive against his foe. First, he assembled a platoon of light tanks, sending them out to recon the rest of the region. This platoon discovered a large ore field southeast of the Allied base, which was heavily defended by the Soviets. Further reconnaissance enabled the platoon to discover an entrance into the atomic processing station. Unfortunately, this was all they could uncover, as Soviet forces in the region destroyed the platoon as it attempted to retreat. Another light tank platoon was deployed, this time discovering the main entrance to the Soviet facility, which as predicted, was heavily guarded. Having mapped out much of the land, and pinpointing the exact location of the enemy facility, the commander constructed a naval yard with which to deploy gunboats to scout out the waterways. It wasn't long till the gunboats encountered an enemy submarine, sinking it as they made their way eastward. The gunboats encountered more submarines as they sailed by the enemy base, while also taking fire from V-2 rocket launchers on land. Though his gunboats were destroyed, the commander wasn't deterred, deploying destroyers to finish what the gunboats started. While the slower-moving destroyers made their way through the waters, the commander ordered his replenished armored company to seek and destroy enemy ore trucks to reduce funding, thereby reducing the number of assaults sent against his base. The armored company first engaged Soviet units before focusing fire on one of the ore trucks. In the meantime, the destroyers continued east, sinking any submarines they encountered. The fleet then headed northward, finding a bay where the submarine pen was located. The destroyers took the pen out, though the facility had plenty of funds to reconstruct it. As far as the Allied commander was concerned, money spent on rebuilding the subpen was money not being used to deploy units to attack his base. Having now fully surveyed the region, the commander had 3 choices available from which to launch attacks against the enemy facility. The first was via the northern entrance, which, as previously mentioned, was heavily guarded. The second choice was the southwestern entrance. While it wasn't as heavily guarded as the northern one, it still wasn't ideal. The third, and best choice, was to land forces on a beach located just to the southeast of the facility. If the landings were successful, Allied units would be able to fire down upon the atomic processing labs from atop a hill. Furthermore, they could destroy most of the facility's power plants, potentially shutting down the more powerful Tesla coil defenses. I believe the commander chose to go through with this third plan, and so began loading his forces onto 3 naval transports. As his naval transports made their way through the waters, the commander sent his reinforced and repaired armored company back into the large ore field just west of the Soviet facility. Here, the company was ordered to engage any ore trucks, prompting the Soviet defenders to respond. This would act as a diversionary attack while his naval transports unloaded his forces behind the facility. After taking out a lone mammoth tank, the commander ordered his mobile artillery to focus fire on the atomic processing labs and missile silos, bringing them crumbling down. Meanwhile, his second armored company would focus on destroying the nearby power plants. To prevent the Soviets from reconstructing lost buildings, the commander rushed his tanks over to the enemy construction yard, using them to distract the defenses while a squad of engineers captured the building. A short time later, the captured construction yard would be destroyed by the Soviet defenders. With the rest of the power plants destroyed, the Tesla coils were now fully offline, enabling the survivors of the distraction force to move into the facility from the southwest entrance. While infrastructure at the southern end of the facility was being demolished by his ground forces, the commander ordered his destroyers to fire upon any enemy units or buildings in range. The Allied forces then moved to the northern quarter of the facility, destroying the war factory, a kennel, and any other surviving defenders. Armored reinforcements arrived from the northern entrance to aid in finishing off any remaining structures. They then headed northeast into the ore field, finding and destroying the last enemy unit here. Following the destruction of their atomic processing facility, the last of the Soviets' Siberian forces wandered out onto the ice wastes, where they established a base. The commander was ordered to finish off this stronghold so that Allied forces would have no trouble moving through the area on their way to Moscow. This was a straightforward search and destroy mission, completed when all enemy forces were removed from the field of battle. The commander's forces entered the Wasteland along a road in the northwest of the region. They were immediately attacked by a Soviet patrol, which focused on trying to destroy the commander's MCV. Following the elimination of this enemy patrol, the commander received a second MCV, along with other reinforcements. The Allied commander initially thought of establishing his base here in the northwest, but realized there weren't enough resources around to sustain it. He ordered his forces to head eastward, hoping to find a more suitable base location. Taking out a few more enemy patrols along the way, the commander's forces found a better spot, one that was near a large ore field that was sustained by a few active mines, along with a couple of gem fields nearby. Almost immediately after deploying his MCV, the commander came under attack by Soviet paratroopers, who were solely focused on destroying the construction yard. The yard survived, though it required repairs. A spy among the commander's forces was sent southward to scout out the region, finding a few oil pumps. It wasn't long after this discovery that the Allied base came under attack by enemy ground forces from the east. After this assault was dealt with, the commander had his second MCV deploy into a construction yard to aid in construction efforts. Just as he had begun to get his base up and running, another, more substantial, Soviet attack came from the east, resulting in the loss of a couple defensive structures. Another attack came from the south, with V-2 rocket launchers supporting more enemy infantry. As the Allied commander was fending off these attacks, the spy made his way further south, finding 2 bridges that crossed the same river. Oil pumps and barrels were located beside the bridges, and the spy observed that enemy forces were using them as shortcuts on their way toward the Allied base. To his east, the spy saw a ford in the river and crossed it, continuing south where he discovered the first Soviet base. The base was well fortified, with concrete walls, Tesla coils, flame towers, and SAM sites. Making his way further south, the spy was able to maneuver behind the enemy base, following the river westward. He discovered another bridge with lots of oil barrels nearby, situated around 4 oil pumps. Just slightly west of this bridge was a ford in the river. Continuing his reconnaissance westward, the spy crossed another river, finding the second Soviet base, which was just as well defended as the first. While the spy was scouting, the commander managed to assemble an armored company of medium tanks, which he sent out to destroy the oil pumps just south of his base. Doing so allowed him to discover a crate of credits, which his tank crews procured. Destroying these pumps really triggered the Soviet forces, with many units converging to destroy the armored company. Luckily, most were infantry, which the tanks easily crushed beneath their treads. Meanwhile, the spy had made it all the way to the west end of the region, and was heading north beside a mountain. On the other side of this mountain was the rest of the second base. It was at this point that the Allied commander realized that while there were technically 2 Soviet bases, they had aligned themselves so close together that they practically created one massive fortress. Attacking them head-on would not be ideal, resulting in mass casualties to his forces. So the commander decided to flank around either the western or eastern ends of each base to attack them from behind. First, the commander used longbow attack helicopters to destroy the 2 bridges south of his base, thereby delaying any future assaults by the Soviets against him from the southeast. During this attack, the longbow shot down a Hind attempting to respond to the bridge's destruction. Next, the commander ordered his armored company of medium tanks and APCs to attack the first Soviet base from the east. The Allied tanks demolished or went around the concrete barriers, destroying the enemy refinery, silos, SAM site, and helipad. With the refinery destroyed, the armored company prepared to move into the enemy base proper by crossing the nearby bridge, but only after the longbows took out one of the Tesla coils. Though one chopper was lost, the coil was destroyed, and the company charged in straight toward the enemy construction yard. With the construction yard gone, there was no way for the Soviet commander at this first base to reconstruct any lost buildings. The armored company then focused fire on any SAM sites they encountered, before being ordered to retreat due to sustained casualties. On their way out, the surviving tanks destroyed the bridge using the nearby oil barrels. The reason the Allied commander had his tanks focused on destroying the SAM sites was so that his attack helicopters could fly in and slowly finish off the rest of the first base's infrastructure unopposed. A few power plants were destroyed, and the commander hoped that was enough to bring the rest of the Tesla coils offline. Unfortunately, the Allied spy, having infiltrated one of the power plants, reported that the base still had sufficient power. The commander decided to take the risk of sending his repaired and reinforced armored company back into the first base via the front entrance. The armored company rolled into the base under fire from enemy infantry, Tesla coils, flame towers, and V-2 rocket launchers. They managed to destroy the most valuable target, the war factory, along with a few enemy vehicles. The commander initially thought to have his units fall back again, but decided to have them focus on destroying the barracks, as it was the last unit production structure this base had. Unfortunately, he didn't account for how damaged his tanks were, which were destroyed by Soviet troops. The silver lining here was that the barracks was so badly damaged, the longbows were able to fly in and finish the building off, effectively putting this first Soviet base out of action. Once he had assembled a brand new armored company, the Allied commander had them finish off the remaining infrastructure of the first Soviet base, along with any units nearby. Following a quick strike by the longbows, the armored company attacked the second Soviet base from the south. The company first focused on destroying 4 ore silos, creating a sightline that enabled them to focus their fire on the enemy construction yard. destroying it. The armored company then destroyed a grounded Mi-24 Hind and the nearby refinery before falling back. While the armored company was back at the commander's base for repairs, the longbows were again sent to raid the enemy base, primarily destroying any defense structures. The Allied commander's final assault came from the north as his revitalized armored company charged in, crushing many enemy troops beneath their treads. Once inside, the company first destroyed the barracks, then the war factory, and finally the 2 airfields. Once the airfields were gone, the Soviet forces dismantled their remaining structures. The enemy forces made a final stand against the Allied units, but in the end were eliminated. The mission was accomplished once every last Soviet unit was removed from this frozen wasteland. Now, as I previously mentioned, there is some confusion as to when exactly this so-called Siberian conflict took place. Based on the briefings for these missions, they seem to suggest that they take place near the end of the war, particularly with those lines mentioning the Allies making a push toward Moscow. However, if these missions really were taking place at the end, why wasn't the unnamed commander given access to the Allies' more advanced weaponry at the time? Especially given the importance of these missions in halting the Soviets' atomic weapons development. My interpretation of this is that the Siberian conflict takes place during the middle of the war, or more specifically, a time period between the middle and early years. The Allied strike force was one that was hastily assembled, prompted by the atomic bombs the Soviets dropped during their invasion of Greece. While disruption of atomic development was the primary goal of the Allied strike force, their secondary goal was to make a push toward Moscow, or at the very least, make the Soviets believe they would. I think the Allies hoped that such a threat would prompt the Union to pull forces off the front lines of Europe and redeploy them to Siberia. The intention here was to provide relief for the Allies' European forces, who at this time were having trouble holding back the Union. Whether this secondary goal worked or not is unknown. But what is known is that the unnamed Allied commander was assigned back to Europe, where he would go on to lead troops against the Soviet Union in Italy and Poland. That, however, is a report for another day, so until then, good luck, Commander.